Hello! My name is Rinon, and welcome to my guide for the final encounter of the Eden's Promise raid, Savage. Just to make it clear to you, there are two bosses in E12S. The first boss is a door boss, and the second boss is the one that I'm going to be teaching you how to defeat today. There are a couple of things that I want to make clear before I get into it. First of all, these strats are week 1 strats by my group. They may not be the most optimal strats in the world, and I'm going to be publishing another video soon with optimized uptime strats for everybody, or maybe new strategies that I think are the safest and most accomplishable in Party Finder. On top of that, the aim of this video is to allow you to understand all of the mechanics in the fight to the extent where you will be able to beat the fight. They are not there to help you get 100 percentile on FF logs using these strats. So if you find something that you prefer better, please use those instead. Okay, let's get into things first of all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video, this POV of us defeating the fight, and I'm going to play each mechanic in its entirety first, and then I'm going to play it back, go in slow motion, explain what you just saw, and how you can get past it consistently and effectively. I guess one quick thing to note before we begin, I apologise if my voice sounds a little bit off. I've just finished prog, had a sleep, and then here I am, so I'm not exactly at 100% form, shall we say. I'm a little bit sick. The other thing is, if you find this video useful and you enjoy it, it would absolutely mean the world to me if you would subscribe to my channel, because it really actually does help me. We also have memberships in my channel, so if you'd like to join that, you're very welcome to. So yeah, let's get into things. So the encounter is going to begin kind of as normal. We'll just see the boss auto-attacking here. I'll explain each cast as we go. The first cast you're going to see here is Hell's Judgment. Hell's Judgment reduces every player's HP to 1, and you'll need to heal them up for the Shockwave Pulsar. Shockwave Pulsar is a pretty heavy raid damage, so make sure they get healed after that. Following this, the boss is going to begin some of her signature attacks. Spell in Waiting, you may remember from E12S. Let me just pause. For those that didn't do E12S, Spell in Waiting will cast an ability, but it will not execute it. Instead, it will give you a debuff, and at the end of that debuff's duration, the mechanic will execute. There are only two very simple spell in waitings that she'll do here. She will either do a spell in waiting that will make you stack, or a spell in waiting that will make you spread. The first one is Dark Water 3, which is a stack, and you'll see that both of the healers get targeted by it. These are 4-player stacks. The other one is Dark Eruption, which is a spread mechanic and will target all 8 players. So the sequence of events here is very simple. She reduces every player's HP to 1. You will heal, she will do a raid damage, and then she will either give you 2 stacks or 8 spreads. And once she has casted the first of the 2 spell in waiting mechanics, say in this case she casts stack first, immediately after she will cast spread. Resolving these mechanics is actually absurdly simple. If she casts stack first, you can already get into your stacks of 4. I would recommend you do a healer, a tank, and 2 DPS in each stack. And if she casts spread first, you just spread immediately and wait. And the second spell in waiting mechanic will have a little bit of nuance to it. So I'm going to play again, show it resolving, and then explain to you how we dealt with that. Okay, so that is the end of the mechanic. You see everything resolve at once, and now I'm going to explain how to do it. The first thing you care about here is the Darkest Dance cast. The way this works is she is going to leap on the furthest player from the party for a pretty hefty damage. I would recommend you have whoever is your off-tank at the time bait this. So when you see the Darkest Dance cast, the off-tank moves to the edge of the arena away from the boss, making sure everybody else is closer to her than that tank. You see here in our party, Bok Choy, the paladin, he does this for us. He moves over, the boss leaps on him, and then we're going to pause again. This is how you resolve this mechanic, because as you saw, she will do a knockback away from her. So what you're going to have to do is, once you've resolved your first stack or spread, you're going to have to get knocked back into your second stack or spread. In this case, in this VOD, we get knocked back into spread, but you can also be knocked back into stacks. All you do, after Darkest Dance happens, you follow her into her hitbox, make sure you're about a third of the way into her hitbox preferably, and you can just angle yourself a little bit. You have time to adjust after you get knocked back, so do not worry too much about it. But there is a very important note to make. Healers. You should save some instant heals for this because it does quite a lot of damage and you will need to heal the party before they take the stack or spread to be safe. So let's play it out again and just show it resolving correctly. You see here we get knocked back, we spread, we heal, we take damage, and we're fine. Then, following that, the boss will cast Shockwave Pulsar once again, which, as we mentioned before, is a raid damage. Now's where the real fun is about to begin. You'll see here, she just does some auto attacks as normal, there's not much going on, but the first major phase is about to begin. You're going to see the boss casting Basic Relativity. We're going to allow this to play out in its entirety and then I'll explain it because there's a lot going on here. But just a note, the cast of Basic Relativity does absurd damage, make sure to mitigate it heavily. So let's watch what's going on. And I won't explain anything and then we'll go back and I'll explain everything. Just make a note here, you're going to see ice exploding, you're going to see beams shooting out, you're going to see gaze flashes go off. On top of that, big fire explosions. Everybody is teleporting around, like what the heck is going on? There we go. Okay, so that is the resolution of the end of the mechanic. So let's go back and let's talk about this, because I'm going to need to break it down a little bit. As the Basic Relativity cast resolves, we're going to pause things and you're going to see a bunch of debuffs on the player. There's also some things around the edge of the arena that you will need to notice to resolve this mechanic. First up, I'm going to talk you through what each of the debuffs do so you can help to figure out how to resolve them. First of all, in the party list, we'll go from top to bottom. On myself, you're going to see the same Dark Water debuff that we saw at the start of the fight. So we know that in 31 seconds, I am going to have a stack mechanic on myself. You're also going to see what looks like a rewind button on my debuff bar. That actually is very simply called rewind. And what happens when this debuff resolves, when it hits 0, you're going to place a little circle AoE on the floor. Later on in the mechanic, you're going to be frozen and you are going to teleport back to where you dropped your rewind. So you are literally going to return back to where you originally were. This is the crux of the mechanic and you're going to need to position your returns very, very, very intelligently to make sure that you can survive through the mechanic. As you see, every player in the group is marked with a rewind, so they will all need to position these in the right place. Next up, you're going to see that the tanks have an eye icon. We know that this is generally a gaze mechanic, so everybody will need to look away from the two tank players when this happens. The other healer also has a Dark Water debuff, so that's very simple to resolve as well. There is one thing that I want to make clear. This mechanic is very role based, and some of the people can get multiple mechanics, so you will have to do multiple different patterns. Tanks and healers are kind of a group here. Either the tanks can receive the gaze icon, or the healers can receive the gaze icon. It's completely random, so you will either have tanks or healers having to deal with a certain mechanic in the fight. Next up come the DPS. All of the DPS have a rewind button, as you can see here. 2 of the DPS have the same Dark Eruption spread mechanic that we saw earlier in the fight, and the other 2 DPS have an ice icon. As we know, the Dark Eruptions are just an AoE on them, so they need to spread when that mechanic resolves, and the ice is a Lunar Dynamo mechanic, which, to make it clear for people who may not have done some of the older turns or encounters, a Lunar Dynamo is a donut circle AoE. So there's going to be a small safe spot directly on the player, and then a big circular AoE around them. Okay, the other thing that you need to resolve this mechanic are the towers or traffic lights around the edge of the arena. You're going to see there are actually 7 traffic lights placed around the arena. There are 6 red ones and a yellow one. As well as this, you're going to see some big purple and yellow tether things attaching from certain traffic lights to others. This is the key to figure out how to work out the mechanic. To make it clear, each of the 6 red traffic lights is going to shoot a beam out on the closest player to it. But with 6 beams, how are you going to shoot everything out at the right time to make sure that nobody gets hit? Well, it's actually very easy, because these tethers between the traffic lights are going to signify which order they shoot beams in. The yellow always goes first, the unmarked always goes second, and the purple always go third. And then finally, when it comes to the yellow traffic light, this traffic light will not shoot a beam at all. Instead, later on in the mechanic, it's going to produce a big semicircle shaped AoE that must be avoided. Okay, now you have all the tools you need to solve this mechanic, so let's resolve it. First of all of the tanks and healers can move towards the yellow traffic light. That is the safe spot for the start of this mechanic. The players who have a short debuff, which is going to be 2 DPS players, it will either be the 2 DPS with their spread mechanic or the 2 DPS with their ice mechanic. So they check the duration of their debuff and figure out which one is going to resolve first. Is it going to be spread first, or is it going to be ice first? The player with the short debuff is going to have to resolve the first traffic light beams. So every player who is not the first debuff goes and stands close to the yellow tower, and those 2 players that have the first resolving debuff will make sure that they are the closest player to the 2 towers that were tethered with yellow. So let's play back my footage now so I can give you an example. You're going to see that most of us move straight to the yellow tower, and we have 2 players staying out and around the boss, one on the top left of the screen and one on the top right. And as you can see, you can bait them in melee range, and you will also see in the cast bar that Dark Current is casting. That is the beam AoE that must be baited. So these players are each the closest to their tower, they bait the beams, done, and at the same time their ice or fire mechanic go off. So there is the ice, and both of those have now resolved and removed from the buff bar. Next we look to the tanks and healers. The gazes are going to go off next, as well as the second towers. So whichever of the tanks and healers are not marked by the gaze mechanic are going to have to bait the second towers, and the tanks or healers which have the gaze mechanics are going to have to make sure to be slightly further behind the group, closer to the yellow tower than everybody else. I'm going to show you exactly how we resolve this, and then I'm going to explain it. Okay, so you saw that. Basically, at the same time as the second beams resolve, everybody drops their replays, and they need to make sure that those replays are close to the yellow tower, and the way that we did it in this video is absolutely perfect. The way that you can make this position safe, effective, and consistent is very, very simple. You have the group stacked max melee range on the boss. You have the 2 players that are marked with gaze standing just behind them. And then the 2 unmarked players, assuming you are in the center of the arena horizontally, they move 4 squares to the left and 4 squares to the right, while staying at the same vertical level as the party. So they start off stacked with the party and they go 4 squares left or 4 squares right, and they stand there. That will allow them to bait the beam regardless of position without hitting the rest of the party. And it will also make sure they're in a safe spot to drop their rewind button, because this is where you need to drop them. Now let's continue on after all of this resolves. The AoE from the yellow tower goes off now, and the next mechanics, as in the last mechanics by the 2 DPS players who have not resolved their debuffs, are going to occur at the same time. Dealing with all of this is very simple too. Everybody who doesn't have to deal with a debuff anymore stacks in the center of the arena, just outside of the semicircle AoE in the boss's hitbox. The 2 players that have to resolve their AoE can spread. The third set of towers and final set of towers are going to be baited by the 2 players from the healers and tanks who had the gaze debuff. So the second towers are baited by the healers and tanks that do not have the gaze debuff, and the third towers are baited by the healers and tanks that do have the gaze debuff. You can easily just take these on the west and east side of the arena with no problem. Following this, you get to watch things play out and resolve themselves. Every player will be stunned, and the rewinds will occur. Everybody will be teleported back into the safe spot after the AoE resolves, and then pushed back without falling off the edge of the arena. And following this, 2 stack damages will occur, so 2 groups of 4, and just heal through the damage, very simple. This is followed up by a shockwave pulsar which completes the phase. One thing to note, you will see that players received a little purple debuff with a 1 stack when they resolved their mechanics. All this means is that if you receive an extra debuff, as in you get hit by something you are not supposed to, you will receive a doom debuff and die. You cannot have 2 stacks of this debuff. So if you accidentally hit somebody with a mechanic, it is a death sentence. Okay, now we move on. Having learned most of the rules of this encounter, we can now resolve the rest of the mechanics with fairly simple results. Let's continue. The boss is now going to cast Singular Apocalypse, which is an intermission phase of sorts. We're going to have to watch the arena here because it's very important. I will let the phase play out and then I'm going to explain everything. There we go, and then the shockwave pulsar once again signifies the end of the phase. So let's go back, watch through this, and figure out how to resolve everything. The first mechanic in this phase is Cataclysm. Cataclysm is really simple. The boss is going to turn to face one of the 4 cardinals, aka north, south, east or west, and you need to get away because she's going to jump on it, and she's going to cause an AoE to spawn from herself that covers about 3/4 of the arena, so get right to the edge. You can use the arena's indicators and markings to actually show you where the safe spot is. You're going to see there is a little circle marking on the AoE with like little triangle icons and circle icons on it near the edge of the arena. As long as you are behind that line, opposite to where she's facing, you are safe. There we go, sorted. So whenever she casts Cataclysm, you do that. The next thing to notice here is the little white light that is moving along the arena, either clockwise or anti-clockwise. It's random. If I remember correctly, in Singular Apocalypse the light will always start in the middle, and then it will move out to either northwest or northeast, aka where the 1 and 2 markers are on my screen, and then it will either go clockwise or anti-clockwise. When it completes its pattern, the AoEs on the arena will explode in that order. So it's actually very simple to decipher. The opposite side to where the boss jumped is always an initial safe spot, so the ranged players can just stay there, keep casting, and wait for mechanics to occur. For the melee players, it's very simple. If the lights are moving clockwise, northwest is a safe spot. If they are moving anti-clockwise, northeast is a safe spot. So you can both set up there and prepare for more mechanics to occur. The Black Halo cast bar is a massive cleave tank buster that, if I remember correctly, is supposed to be taken by 2 tanks, but I implore you, ignore that. Use your tank invulns on them, because you can tank invuln every single Black Halo in the fight and there is no reason not to, so just invuln those Black Halos, pretend they don't exist. As the first circle explodes, which will always be in the middle, the Shell Crusher cast will begin. This is a party share stack damage, So as soon as you see the circle explode, everybody runs into the middle of the arena to take that stack damage. You should expect to need to mitigate this because in week 1 at least, it hits like an absolute truck and players are going to take more damage afterwards, so heal accordingly. Following this, there is one more mechanic. The boss is going to cast Spirit Taker, which is a leap onto one random player. It can target absolutely anybody and it will shoot a big circular AoE from them when it hits the floor, and if anybody else gets hit by it, they're dead. Just say goodbye. So you have to make sure that after the stack, you spread while being very, very mindful of where the pulsing light AoEs are going. Following all of this, Shockwave Pulsar happens and the phase resolves. Next up, Intermediate Relativity is going to cast, and it's the same as the first Relativity in terms of doing massive damage, so make sure to mitigate the party accordingly. One thing I want to make clear about these Relativity hits, they are not just normal raid damage, they do not work like that. If you did Neo X Death, they work the same as the Grand Cross damage mechanics. They are a party share, a room-wide party share. So if you have 7 players alive, you're going to take more damage than if you have 8 players alive. And at 6 players, it's basically unsurvivable currently. So make sure you have all of your players rezzed, topped and healed, ready to go into any relativity mechanic, or you will not be able to effectively resolve it. Once again, I'm going to let the mechanic play out and then I'm going to explain how we did it. One thing I want to note here as well, I think the easiest way to resolve mechanics in this encounter is to have markers at the edge of the arena at every cardinal and intercardinal, and I'll explain why during this mechanic. Okay, so let's watch things play out. There we go, and once again, the boss goes into Shockwave Pulsar to signify the end of the phase. Now we're going to have to break this down, and it's actually way easier than it looks. At the end of the cast, every player will receive tons of debuffs again, and I'll explain what they all do. One thing to note is that all of the debuffs in this phase are once again role-based, so you can make a group of tanks and healers and a group of DPS and resolve the mechanics that way. I would also recommend you give each pair, as in a DPS and a tank or healer, 1/4 of the arena to play with. So you could have north to west for one group, west to south for another, etc, etc, etc. And that works fine. That gives everybody a very clear position where they need to resolve their mechanics, and it gives them space to be able to do so. In the way that we had the mechanics resolve in this pull, the 4 tanks and healers received an aero debuff, and the 4 DPS received an ice. We already know what ice does, but aero is a large circle AoE around the player when it detonates. The second set of debuffs, which are the little circles with smaller circles inside them, I guess, I don't really know how to explain it, those are spread damages. The final set of debuffs here, there are 4 gazes on the tanks and healers, they could also be on the DPS. There are 3 flares on DPS, which are the little white triangle ones, and then the yellow mechanic with the little arrows going down is a stack, which is takeable and survivable by 5 players. These mechanics can happen in a random order. I know I haven't mentioned the 4th debuff yet because it is separate, but these 3 sets of debuffs that we have talked about can occur in random order. So, you could, for instance, receive spread, then gazes and flares, then aero and ice. You could also receive gazes, then aero and ice, then spread. That it could work like any of those mechanics, but you will not have it split up, so you will never receive, for example, Aero and Flares or Ice and Gaze. That won't happen. They are always paired up in this way, but in a random order. The fourth mechanic is a multiple rewind mechanic, so you will have to be rewound numerous times into different positions to resolve the mechanics. So what I'm going to do here is actually really easy. I'm going to tell you where to stand for each of the sets of mechanics. The way that we found to do this very, very easily was that instead of looking at your debuffs from left to right, look at them from right to left and do them that order, because the rewinds are going to go from shortest to longest, so you're going to need to resolve the longest first. So, in this case, we would resolve Gazes, Flares and Stack, then Spread, then Aero and Ice. So I'm going to explain what you have to do for each of those mechanics in that order, but if they're in a different order, you just do the same placements but in a different order to accommodate that. For Gazes, Flares and Stack, we had 3 marked Flare players walk to their intercardinal marker. So that is, if your quadrant is west to south, you would go southwest and stand on the marker on the edge of the arena. If you are north to west, you would be northwest. That's very, very simple, and that's actually why I said to have markers set up the way that I did. If you are a gaze marked player, you will stand underneath the boss's hitbox in a small square formation, making sure to be a little bit out of center and towards your intercardinal. So again, I'm the southwest player here, so we're all in a small box, but I'm a tiny bit to the southwest, just a tiny bit, just a step, that's all it takes. Lastly, the player who is marked by a stack, they are also going to come up to the 4 gaze marked players and stand with them, making sure to be a tiny bit further outside than the 4 gaze players, so they are not behind them. They are not closer to the center of the arena than them. Sorted. For Spread, it's very simple, you spread out, that's it. There's not really much more to talk about here. For Aeros and Ices, again, very, very easy. The Aeros will go and stand on their intercardinal markers at the edge of the arena, and the Ices will stack up in the center of the arena. That's all you need to know to resolve this mechanic. There is no more nuance, there is nothing tricky. You just deal with each of the 3 sets of mechanics as if it is a completely individual mechanic. Stand in those positions, wait for the rewind to drop, then move to your next position, wait for the rewind to drop, then move to your last position. And when you move to your last position, look to the outside of the arena, because where you are frozen determines your facing, and you need to make sure to be faced correctly to avoid the gaze mechanic. So let's play all of this out again now that you know all of the components, and you'll see that it's actually incredibly simple. So you see here I start off by moving into the center just a tiny bit close to the D marker. This is to drop my gaze. The gaze goes down. Next up is Spread, so I move away from any other player and I stay still. And then lastly is Aero, so I move to my corner and I look out. Then I get frozen and the mechanics resolve one by one by one. Lastly, the boss is going to cast Shockwave Pulsar, which is raid damage, to signify the end of the phase. The next phase to bear in mind is called Dual Apocalypse, and it's going to build on what you already know from Singular Apocalypse. The boss, once again to start with, is going to cast Cataclysm, so you need to make sure to move away from her to the opposite side of the arena to where she is facing. And our friends, the little light-shaped circles that move around the arena, are back, but this time there are 2 of them. When you are dealing with Cataclysm, I want you to watch out for one specific thing. When the light AoEs move out of the center, do they move to the boss and opposite the boss first, or do they move to the west and east of the boss first? When you know this, the opposites are the safe spots. So if she moves north and south first, after Cataclysm you move to the west and east. If she moves west and east first, after the Cataclysm you move to the north and south first. Following this, the group can move to the center of the arena once again, and this will be safe for everybody apart from the tanks until the end of the mechanic. So everybody else just chill there, do DPS, and let the tanks resolve the rest of the mechanics. First of all is Somber Dance, which is once again, as we saw earlier, the boss is going to jump out and smash the furthest away player, which in this case we want to be the off tank. Following this, the boss will jump again on the closest player, so you can make her jump back to the main tank and that will resolve the mechanic. The way that we did this, the main tank is already going to be up by the boss after the middle AoE resolves. The off tank can run to whichever was safe of north or west east and be super jumped from there by the boss. The main tank can follow them and make sure they are the closest player and be hit by the second jump, and you're going to see it all resolve here a little bit messily, but the concept is the same. So the off tank moves out to the safe half of the arena, gets jumped, the main tank follows, and then gets jumped second. After all of this, Shell Crusher will once again cast, which as a reminder is a stack into a spread mechanic. So you stack up first, and then you all spread out and one player is going to be leapt on for massive damage. Once again, Pulsar Shockwave marks the completion of this phase. Now we're going to go into Advanced Relativity, which again is a fairly easy mechanic to resolve actually. It's something very, very difficult to understand and to grasp, but once you know what the debuffs do and you understand what happens in the phase, the actual execution of a solution is so easy. So I'm going to run you through that now. Once again, remember, the cast bar of a relativity skill does insane damage, so mitigate as needed. We're going to once again watch all the mechanics play out, watch everyone complete it properly, and then I'll talk you through the debuffs and where to stand. You'll see here there's towers and tethers once again from the first relativity. The debuffs are back from the second relativity, as well as the rewinds from the second relativity, the numerous multiple rewinds. So just watch everything happen. And then stack damages occur. And the phase is complete. And Shockwave Pulsar happens once again to show you that it's all finished. You'll probably notice the trend. Shockwave Pulsar happens after every phase, just to show you that you finished it. So let's go back to where all of this stuff applies, all of the tethers appear, and I'll explain you how to resolve it. First thing you want to do, you will see purple tethers between two of the traffic lights and yellow tethers between two of the traffic lights. You need to orient yourself based on the yellow traffic lights. You will also need to assign yourselves groups of 4 and have one group of 4 go to one yellow traffic light and one group of 4 go to another, and you need to be able to consistently do that. So make sure to split your parties in whichever formation you feel is best, but make sure you have a tank, a healer, and 2 DPS in each formation, otherwise the mechanic will not work correctly. You want to watch your debuffs once again. Either the 2 tanks and healers or the 4 DPS will receive the Dark Water stack debuff, and the other 4 players will receive the Dark Eruption spread debuff. On top of that, 4 players will have additional debuffs to resolve. 2 of them are going to have 2 arrow debuffs, and 2 of them are going to have an arrow debuff and a gaze. This is actually really easy to resolve if you use the arena's markings to help you out. So, your groups of 4 move behind the yellow traffic lights, and you're going to see here on the arena that there's this little triangle shaped thing, like a rounded triangle. I'm not good at words, so I don't really know how to describe that, but you'll see the lines in the AoE give you a little rounded kind of pyramid shape. Make sure all of the players are behind that line, as well as behind your yellow traffic light, and they can stack together. The 2 players that have 2 arrow debuffs will move slightly behind them. In this case, I am that POV, so it makes it very easy to distinguish. The group is stacked, and I move a tiny bit behind. You stay there. The group will take a stack damage and drop their first rewind debuffs. Then you can move on to your second positions, which are the same for almost everybody with only a tiny bit of variation. The rule we found to make this really easy was, if you have a gaze, you move to the right. If you do not have a gaze, you move to the left. You use the same rounded triangle icon on the floor. The arena marking will help you out, and you just move to the edge of the arena in the corners of those markings, and that will allow you to drop your second debuff safely. So you see here we drop our second debuffs. Our third debuffs, our third rewinds, are the only ones that are a little bit more difficult. For your final positions, if you are a player with an arrow, which is, it's either going to be all tanks and healers or DPS, you move from your second position and you go over to the next rounded triangle safe spot and just get right in the close corner of that one. So you see here, I started on the 3 marker and I just moved over to the next safe spot and stayed in the corner. If you were the gaze player, so you're over to the right, you do the exact same thing, but you'll move a tiny bit to the right. Then your mechanic is resolved, and you are sorted if you're an arrow player. You just chill there, look to the outside of the arena, wait to be frozen and for the mechanics to resolve. But as a player that has eruption or the spread debuff, you have to go somewhere else. I'm going to grab a different POV to show you me doing it from the eruption POV, but it's also very simple. You'll see that I pan my camera here. The way I like to describe it, you'll see a really good picture of the arena here, so you can see all of the markings. It looks like a flower, right? There's petals coming out from the middle. If you're an eruption player, you want to go and stand in one of those petals. It's not a random petal either, it's a very specific one. So let's just figure this out real quick and show you how to go. If you're an eruption player, you will have always moved to the left hand side as a group of 3 to drop your second rewind debuffs, correct? Then, if you're an eruption, you continue moving to the left hand side, you continue going along until you find the next petal that you were not already standing next to. So in this case, if you started on the 3 marker like we did, you continue going round until you find the petal near the 2 marker. One of the 2 players stands on the edge of the arena inside the petal, and one of the players stands closer to the center of the arena inside the petal, both making sure that you are not intersecting another petal. You have to be fully in your own petal. Following this, you look to the outside of the arena. You might ask, why are these positions so tight? Well, that is because the traffic lights are going to explode and you need to be in safe spots to allow you to resolve your own explosion mechanics, your own aero mechanics and gaze mechanics without hitting a traffic light. So now that you know all of the positions, let's watch this mechanic play out again. And then at the end of the mechanic, the 3 players on each side of the arena that were not affected by double aero will be pushed over to the opposite side. You will have to resolve the 2 stack damages that go off, and then the phase has resolved and we go into Shockwave Pulsar raid damage once again, and we continue to the next phase. The next phase of the fight is Triple Apocalypse, and it's the last, and at least for me, from my perspective, the most difficult Apocalypse mechanic to resolve consistently. This time the Oracle of Darkness will not start things off with a Cataclysm. We'll play out the mechanics here, and you will see that there are 3 light circles moving around this time, followed by a Darkest Dance, which we know affects the furthest player from the group, and then a knockback. Right. Let's break this down real quick. The way we resolve this mechanic is actually very simple, because it allows you to completely ignore the 2 lights that are going around the edge. Instead, you only watch the light that comes out from the center of the arena. So you follow it as it goes out, and you make sure to watch where it moves. It's either going to move to the left or to the right once it moves out of the center. You follow it, move to its second position along with it, and then from this point there are 2 perspectives you need to understand. the perspective of the tank, who is going to take the somber dance by being furthest away from the boss, and the perspective of the group, who is going to need to be knocked into their position effectively without being hit by the somber dance. I'm going to explain to you the way that this mechanic works in my brain in terms of what you do to resolve it, because the other two light AoEs are also going to be going off, which creates a lot of unsafe space on the arena. So you watch the center AoE, watch it move out of the center and follow it. Watch if it goes left or right and follow it again to its next position, and then you stand there and wait. If you're a tank player who is taking the jump, you wait on the edge of the arena. If you are a DPS or healer player, or even the other tank who is not going to take the darkest dance jump, then you wait close but not in the center of the arena. As soon as the damage in the center pulses, the rest of the group moves into the middle and the tank stays where they are. The tank will be jumped by darkest dance, and following this, the group will move back into the boss's hitbox, and they will stand on either the left or right side of the boss's hitbox, depending on one very simple thing. Did the center circle AoE, did it move left or did it move right when you followed it? If it moved to the right, you stand on the left side of the boss's hitbox. If it moved to the left, you stand on the right side of the boss's hitbox. This will knock you into a massive safe spot and resolve the mechanic very, very easily for you. This completes the mechanic, and it's followed up by our best friend Shockwave Pulsar, which is another raid damage. Black Halo happens once again, which, if you remember, that is the tank cleave that I recommend you invuln. We're very close to the end of the fight now. There is only one more phase to worry about, and this one is going to hurt. There are no mechanics to deal with here. This is instead soft enrage, and it is going to be triggered by the Terminal Relativity cast. This does insane damage, so mitigate as needed. When Terminal Relativity goes off, each and every player is going to receive 3 Spell in Waiting Quietus debuffs. The Quietus debuffs are going to go off in 3-second intervals, as far as I remember, and each of them is going to hit for a pretty solid chunk of damage. I believe it's around 20 to 30k, so you have 20 to 30k hits going off every 3 seconds, followed up by repeated casts of Shockwave Pulsar. There will be 3 casts in total, each of which does more and more damage, and it makes the Quietuses do more and more damage. My recommendation here would be to make a robust mitigation plan if you want to survive. There is a note that we learned that is very, very useful. 15-second mitigations like Dark Missionary, Heart of Light, and Tactician, those can cover 2 of the Shockwave Pulsars as well as all of the damage in between if you make sure to use them near the end of the cast bar. So make sure you have a robust mitigation plan with a lot of support from your party. We made a macro for it to make it nice and brain dead for everyone to click their buttons at the right time, and I made sure to call out which cast bar was happening, whether it was 1st, 2nd, 3rd or 4th, to make sure that people knew when to press their mitigation buttons. That's the end of the fight. If you get through all of that successfully with as few deaths as possible, you should have no problem defeating the encounter. It does not have a particularly strict DPS check, so just play safe, try to avoid death and damage down, and you should have a very, very easy time beating this fight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this guide. I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of the mechanics and that you understand the encounter a little bit better now. These strats are not going to be the best strats in the world, but they are going to be good enough to get you through the fight week 1 with enough uptime to get through the DPS check. I'm going to release a second video in a week or 2 when I've had a chance to try more uptime strats and play around, and I can release what I feel is a guide that will allow players to do this fight with as much DPS efficiency as possible, as well as much safety as possible, so please look forward to that. Thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful day. Good luck on E12S.